woman the world called too big to matter was about to prove she was the only thing standing between a mafia king and a bullet meant for his heart. 3 men were already dead on the marble floor of his own ballroom, and nobody in that room had seen her move. Maya Quinn had spent 29 years being underestimated, and tonight that mistake was about to get someone killed. The story of how a heavy-set girl from a forgotten gym in a forgotten neighborhood ended up married to the most feared man on the East Coast starts 6 months earlier in a place nobody important ever bothered to look. The gymnasiums smelled like bleach and old rubber mats, the same smell Maya had grown up with since she was 9 years old, back when her uncle Walter first put a pair of cracked leather gloves on her hands and told her that the world would try to make her small, and her job was to make sure it never succeeded. Walter was gone now, 3 years in the ground, and Maya kept the gym running on fumes and stubbornness, teaching self-defense classes to nurses who worked night shifts and teenagers whose parents wanted them off the street. She was 29, built like a woman who could move a refrigerator by herself, broad through the shoulders and thick through the hips, and she had heard every variation of every insult about her size since middle school. She had stopped flinching at most of them. Mostly. The gym sat 2 blocks from the harbor, in a part of the city where the warehouses still had their original signage from companies that had stopped existing decades ago and where rent was cheap because the building inspectors mostly stayed away. Maya liked it that way. Fewer people meant fewer comments about how a woman her size shouldn't be the one teaching anybody how to fight. She had heard that one from a city councilman's aide once, a thin man in an expensive coat who had wandered in looking for a yoga studio and left looking like he had seen a ghost after Maya demonstrated, politely, exactly what would happen if he ever grabbed a woman by the wrist the way he had grabbed his assistant outside. He never came back. Maya didn't care. She had bigger problems, namely, a roof that leaked every time it rained, and a landlord who kept threatening to sell the building out from under her. On the night everything changed, it was raining, because of course it was, and Maya was alone in the gym at 9 in the evening, mopping water off the mat with a towel that had seen better decades, when the front door slammed open hard enough to rattle the frame. A man stumbled in, soaked through, one arm pressed tight against his ribs, blood seeping between his fingers and dripping onto the floor Maya had just cleaned. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing what had clearly once been an extremely expensive suit jacket, now ruined, and he looked at Maya with the kind of desperate calculation of a man doing math on how many seconds he had left. "I need a phone," he said, his voice rough, controlled despite the obvious pain. "And I need you to not call the police." Maya did not call the police, not because she cared about his demand, but because she had grown up in this neighborhood long enough to know that calling the police on a bleeding man in an expensive suit was a good way to end up dead by morning, one way or another. Instead, she locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and told him to sit down before he bled out on her floor. "I've got a first aid kit," she said. "It's not great, but it's better than nothing." The man studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made Maya feel like she was being assessed by a predator deciding whether she was worth the energy of being dangerous toward. Then, slowly, he sat down on the bench against the wall. "Gabriel," he said. "My name is Gabriel." Maya didn't offer her name back immediately. She got the first aid kit, gloves, and a clean towel, and pulled his jacket and shirt aside enough to see the wound, a graze along his side, ugly, but not as deep as the amount of blood suggested. "You're lucky," she said, cleaning it with more efficiency than gentleness. "Inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation." Gabriel watched her hands work with an intensity that made the back of Maya's neck prickle. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. "I run a self-defense gym," Maya said. "You learn first aid fast when half your students show up with split lips from boyfriends who think they're entitled to use their hands. Something flickered across Gabriel's face, gone before Maya could name it. Maya, she said finally, because it felt rude not to, even under the circumstances. Maya Quinn. Gabriel repeated the name quietly, like he was filing it away somewhere permanent. Outside, the rain kept hammering the windows, and somewhere a few blocks away, sirens wailed past without slowing down, and Maya had the distinct feeling that whatever had put a bullet graze on this man's ribs was still out, there, looking for him, and that letting him sit in her gym for one more minute was either the kindest or the stupidest thing she had ever done. She suspected, even then, that it might end up being both. By the time Maya finished bandaging the wound, Gabriel had stopped looking quite so much like a man about to pass out, and started looking like a man recalculating an entire situation. He flexed his fingers, testing the bandage, and then reached into his ruined jacket and pulled out a phone that, miraculously, still worked. He typed something quickly, then looked up at Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I owe you," he said simply, "more than you know." Maya shrugged, tossing the bloodied gloves into the trash. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't bleed on my mats again." A faint, almost surprised smile crossed Gabriel's face, like the idea of someone not wanting anything from him was a foreign concept. Within 20 minutes, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the gym, engines idling low and quiet in a way that expensive cars idled when their owners didn't want to be noticed. 4 men got out, moving with the kind of synchronized alertness that told Maya everything she needed to know about who they worked for, even before one of them, a heavy-set older man with a face like a closed fist, stepped inside and immediately went rigid at the sight of Gabriel sitting upright. "Boss," the man said, relief and fury warring in his voice, "we've been tearing the docks apart looking for you. The Castellano crew said you went down at the warehouse, said they saw you take a hit." "I'm fine, Dom," Gabriel said, standing, testing his footing. "Thanks to her." Dom's eyes swung to Maya, sizing her up the way men like that always did, the quick once-over that cataloged size and presumed irrelevance in the same glance. "She patch you up?" "She did," Gabriel said, and there was something in his tone, some warning note, that made Dom's expression shift slightly, recalibrate. "Get the car ready. I need a minute." Dom nodded and stepped back outside, leaving Gabriel and Maya alone again. Gabriel turned to her, and for the first time since he'd walked through her door, he looked less like a wounded animal, and more like exactly what Maya was beginning to suspect he was. Someone very powerful and very dangerous and very used to getting what he wanted. "You know who I am, don't you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. Maya had grown up 2 blocks from the harbor her whole life. She knew the name Castellano. She knew, by extension and reputation, the names of every crew that operated near the water, and there was only one organization whose people moved like Gabriel's men moved, whose suits cost more than Maya's monthly rent, and whose presence made grown men in this neighborhood go quiet and find somewhere else to be. "You're a Moreno," Maya said. It wasn't a guess. Gabriel's family ran half the port and most of the import business that flowed through it, legally and otherwise, and everyone on this side of the city knew it, the way they knew which streets flooded first when it rained. "Gabriel Moreno." Gabriel inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement. "And you just patched up the head of that family in your gym, with no questions asked, and you're not currently panicking about that fact. That's unusual, Maya Quinn." "I figure panicking wouldn't change anything," Maya said, wiping down the bench where Gabriel had been sitting, partly because it needed it, and partly because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't looking at him directly. "And honestly, I've got bigger things to worry about than which crime family's boss bled on my floor." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bigger things than that. My landlord's trying to sell this building out from under me," Maya said, before she could stop herself, the words coming out flatter. and more exhausted than she intended. I've got 30 days to either come up with money I don't have or find a new building for 40 kids who've got nowhere else to go after school. So yeah, you being a Moreno is interesting, but it's not really at the top of my list tonight. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression Maya couldn't place, somewhere between curiosity and something sharper underneath it. 30 days, he repeated. Show me the lease. Maya blinked. Excuse me? The lease, Gabriel said again, already moving toward the door, his men outside straightening as he approached. And the landlord's name. I'll be in touch, Maya Quinn. And then he was gone, into the rain, into one of the black SUVs, and the street outside went quiet again, as if none of it had happened at all. Maya stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the spot where the cars had been, and told herself that nothing would come of it. Powerful men made promises to strangers all the time and forgot them by morning. She locked up, went home, and tried not to think about dark eyes that had looked at her like she was something worth remembering. 3 days later, Maya's landlord called her, voice strange and stammering, to inform her that the building had, in fact, just been purchased outright, and that the new owner had specified, in writing, that the gymnasium's lease was to be extended indefinitely at the current rate, with all necessary repairs completed within the week. Maya stood in the middle of her gym, phone pressed to her ear, and felt something cold and unfamiliar settle into her stomach, because she understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what it meant when a man like Gabriel Moreno decided he owed someone a debt. The repairs happened exactly as promised. A roofing crew showed up 2 days later and fixed the leak that had been Maya's problem for 18 months, working in total silence, refusing payment, refusing even to make eye contact, like men who had been given very specific instructions and very specific consequences if those instructions weren't followed precisely. Maya tried to put it out of her mind. She had a gym to run, classes to teach, and a life that did not involve crime families, even grateful ones. That lasted exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, Gabriel Moreno walked back into her gym, this time uninjured, dressed in a suit that fit him the way suits were supposed to fit men who never had to think about money. And he asked Maya, with the same flat directness he'd used to ask about her lease, if she would have dinner with him. Maya laughed, actually laughed, because the question was so absurd in context that her brain didn't immediately know what else to do with it. You're joking, she said. Gabriel did not look like he was joking. I don't joke, he said. I asked a question. I'd like an answer. Maya crossed her arms, studying him the way she'd study an opponent who'd just done something unexpected in a sparring match, trying to figure out the angle. Mr. Moreno, she started. Gabriel, he corrected. Gabriel, Maya allowed. I appreciate the roof. I really do. But I'm not. I don't need you to feel obligated to take me to dinner because I put a bandage on you. We're square. The roof more than covers it. This isn't about the roof, Gabriel said, and something in his voice had shifted, lower, more deliberate. I have had dinner with hundreds of women in my life, Maya. Models, actresses, daughters of men I do business with, sent across the table like chess pieces. Every single one of them looked at me like I was either a prize to be won or a threat to be managed. You looked at me like I was a man bleeding on your floor who needed a bandage. I haven't been able to stop thinking about that. Maya felt heat climb up her neck and hated it. Hated how easily this man's words landed somewhere she hadn't expected to be vulnerable. That's a nice line, she said, more sharply than she meant to. But I know what men like you actually want, Gabriel, and it's not dinner with a woman built like me. I've spent my whole life being the punchline. I'm not interested in being anyone's experiment, or anyone's secret, or anyone's joke to his friends later. Something dark crossed Gabriel's face, fast and gone, but unmistakable, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped into something colder. Anyone who has ever made you feel like a punchline, he said slowly, was a small man with a small mind, and I would very much like their names. Maya stared at him. That's not the point I was making. It's the only point that matters to me, Gabriel said, and stepped closer, close enough that Maya had to tilt her head back slightly to keep looking at him, and the gym suddenly felt very quiet, very small. Maya, I am not asking you to dinner because I feel sorry for you or because I want a story to tell. I am asking because 3 days ago I sat in my study, bleeding, surrounded by men who would die for me out of fear, and the only person who looked at me and saw a man who needed help, instead of a man to be afraid of, was you. I don't know what to do with that. I haven't known what to do with that for 3 days. So I am asking you to dinner because I would like to know you, and because for the first time in longer than I can remember, I am nervous, and I do not enjoy being nervous. Maya Quinn. And it is entirely your fault. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Maya could hear the rain starting again outside, soft against the windows. And despite every alarm bell in her head, despite 29 years of bracing for the punchline, Maya heard herself say, "Fine, one dinner. But if you're lying to me, Gabriel Moreno, I will make sure you regret it, and I don't care how many men you've got in those black cars." Gabriel's smile, when it came, was slow and real and looked entirely unfamiliar on a face that Maya suspected didn't smile often. "I would expect nothing less," he said. The dinner became a second dinner, and then a third, and within 2 months, Maya Quinn had quietly, almost without realizing it, become the most consistent presence in Gabriel Moreno's life, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the people around him. The men in his organization were, for the most part, careful and professional about it, the way men are careful and professional about things they've been told not to comment on. But careful and professional did not mean accepting, and Maya felt the weight of unspoken judgment everywhere she went within Gabriel's world. In the way certain women at certain events looked at her like a mistake that hadn't been corrected yet. In the way certain men's eyes would flick down and then deliberately, pointedly, not flick back up. Gabriel noticed all of it, every time, and every time his response was the same. A quiet word, a look that made the offending party go pale, and afterward an apology to Maya so sincere it almost embarrassed her. "You don't have to do that every time," she told him one night, after a charity gala where a board member's wife had made a comment about Maya's dress size loud enough to be overheard. "I've heard worse. I can handle it." "I know you can handle it," Gabriel said, his jaw tight, his arm tightening slightly where it rested at her waist. "That isn't the point. You shouldn't have to. Not around me, not ever." It was during one of these events, 3 months into whatever it was that existed between them, that Maya first met Vincent Castellano and felt, for the first time since the night Gabriel walked into her gym bleeding, the specific cold prickle of instinct that told her something was wrong. Vincent was Gabriel's cousin on his mother's side, technically family, technically an ally, running the Castellano crew that controlled the northern half of the port in an arrangement that had existed for 2 generations and had, by all accounts, always been stable. Vincent was charming in the practiced way of men who had learned charm as a survival skill rather than a personality trait, all white teeth and warm handshakes. And he greeted Maya with exaggerated enthusiasm that didn't sit right in her stomach for reasons she couldn't immediately name. "So this is the famous Maya," Vincent said, taking her hand and holding it a beat too long. "Gabriel's told me so much about you. A self-defense instructor, is that right? How charming." Gabriel's never dated anyone with an actual job before. The word charming, repeated twice, landed wrong, like a compliment with its edges deliberately sanded down into something sharper. Maya smiled politely and said something non-committal, and the moment passed and the evening continued, and if Gabriel noticed any tension, he didn't show it. But Maya noticed something else, something small, something that anyone who hadn't spent 2 decades learning to read bodies in a fight would have missed entirely. When Vincent shook Gabriel's hand in greeting, His grip lasted exactly 1 second too long, and his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, dropped to the inside pocket of Gabriel's jacket, where Maya knew, because she had felt it pressed against her more than once during quiet moments. Gabriel kept a small leather notebook containing the combination to a safe that held, among other things, the location of every shipment his organization moved through the port. It was nothing. It was probably nothing. Maya told herself it was nothing for the rest of the evening, and mostly believed it, except that 2 weeks later, during a quiet morning at the gym, one of Gabriel's men, a young one named Theo, who Maya had grown fond of over the months, mentioned in passing, without thinking much of it, that 2 of the last 3 shipments through the northern docks had been intercepted by a rival organization with timing that suggested someone had known the routes in advance, down to the hour. Boss thinks it's a leak somewhere in logistics, Theo said, shrugging, helping Maya stack mats after class. Probably some low-level guy selling information. Happens sometimes. Maya kept stacking mats and said nothing, and felt the cold prickle return, stronger this time, settling into something that felt less like instinct and more like certainty. Logistics didn't know the routes down to the hour. Only family knew that. Only people close enough to be in the room when Gabriel made his plans. Maya did not say anything to Gabriel right away. For the same reason, a fighter doesn't throw a punch the moment they sense an opening. Timing mattered, and being wrong about something this big could destroy something. Maya had only just started to believe she was allowed to have. Instead, she started watching quietly, the way she had been trained to watch a sparring partner for tells. The small, unconscious signals that revealed what someone was about to do before they did it. She watched Vincent Castellano at every gathering she attended over the following weeks, and the pattern that emerged was small but consistent. Vincent always positioned himself near Gabriel's security detail when they thought no one important was paying attention. Always asked Theo and the younger guards friendly, casual questions about schedules and routines that, taken individually, meant nothing, but taken together painted the shape of a man building a very detailed map. Maya also did something else, something she hadn't told Gabriel about, something from a part of her life she rarely discussed. Before the gym, before Walter, Maya had spent 2 years as a teenager in the foster system, bouncing between houses in a part of the city controlled by a different, smaller crew, and during that time, she had learned, out of necessity, not just how to fight, but how to read the specific body language of men who were planning violence, the particular stillness that settled over someone in the hour before they did something they couldn't undo. She recognized that stillness on Vincent Castellano 3 days before the gala at the Moreno estate, the annual gathering where every captain and lieutenant in the organization, along with most of the Castellano crew, would be under one roof to celebrate the anniversary of Gabriel's father taking over the family decades earlier. Maya told Gabriel everything 2 nights before the gala, sitting across from him at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning, after he'd come home from a meeting and found her still awake, waiting. She laid it out carefully, methodically, the way Walter had taught her to break down an opponent. The handshake, the inside pocket, the leaked shipments, the questions Vincent had been asking the youngers, the specific stillness she'd recognized in him 3 days ago at a meeting Maya hadn't even been formally invited to, but had attended anyway. Standing quietly in a corner where people tended to forget she existed, which was, Maya had long ago realized, one of the strange gifts of being underestimated. Gabriel listened without interrupting, his face going through several careful transformations, disbelief first. Then, something colder, then something that looked almost like grief. "Vincent," he said finally, quietly, more to himself than to Maya. "My mother's family. He was at my christening, Maya. He taught me to drive." "I know," Maya said gently, "and I could be wrong. I really could be. But Gabriel, if I'm right and you don't act on it before that gala, every captain in your organization is going to be in one building, and so is every gun Vincent's crew can bring, without it looking suspicious. Gabriel was quiet for a long time, and when he finally looked up at Maya, there was something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Something that looked like the moment a man realizes the ground beneath him isn't solid, and that the only solid thing left is the person sitting across from him. If you're right, he said slowly, then the gala isn't a celebration. It's an execution, and Vincent's been planning to make it look like a Castellano-Moreno conflict gone wrong, a tragedy, a massacre that conveniently leaves him as the only senior leader still standing in either family. That's what it looks like to me, Maya said. So what do we do? Gabriel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Maya saw the man who had walked into her gym bleeding and unwilling to call for help, the man who survived because he never let anyone see him as anything other than completely in control. We don't cancel, Gabriel said. If we cancel, Vincent knows we know, and he accelerates, and we lose the only advantage we have, which is that he doesn't know what you are, Maya. He spent 3 months looking at you and seeing exactly what he's been told to see. A woman who runs a gym and decided to play house with a rich man. He has no idea what you actually are. Maya felt something settle in her chest, cold and clear, the same feeling she got in the seconds before a sparring match started, the feeling Walter used to call going quiet, the moment where fear and adrenalines stopped being separate things and became fuel instead. Then let's keep it that way, Maya said. Let him walk into that ballroom thinking I'm exactly what he thinks I am, and let's see how far that gets him. The night of the gala, the Moreno estate was lit up like something out of an old film, golden light spilling from every window across the manicured grounds, valets in white gloves directing an endless line of black cars up the long gravel drive. Maya wore a deep green gown that Gabriel had chosen for her personally, ignoring the stylist's nervous suggestion of something darker and looser, insisting instead on a fabric and cut that moved with Maya's body instead of against it, that made her feel, for the first time at one of these events, like she belonged in the room rather than like she was apologizing for being in it. Underneath the gown, strapped along her thigh in a holster, Maya had insisted on, despite Gabriel's initial hesitation, was a compact folding knife, the same one Walter had given her on her 18th birthday, the one she had carried every single day since, the one that had never once, in 11 years, needed to be used for anything more serious than cutting tape at the gym. Maya hoped, walking up the steps of the Moreno estate on Gabriel's arm, that tonight would not be the night that changed. The ballroom was already half full when they arrived. Captains and lieutenants and their families circulating with champagne under crystal chandeliers, and Maya scanned the room with the same methodical patience she'd use scanning a sparring ring, cataloging exits, cataloging the positions of Vincent's people, cataloging the small details that told a story most people in the room would never think to look for. She found Vincent near the bar, laughing too loudly at something one of his lieutenants had said, his eyes doing the same slow circuit of the room that Maya's were, except his were counting guns instead of exits. He caught Maya looking at him and smiled, that same too warm smile from the first night they'd met, and raised his glass slightly in her direction. And Maya smiled back and felt absolutely nothing behind it, the way Walter had taught her to smile at opponents she intended to beat badly. The evening proceeded for almost 2 hours, exactly as it should have. Toasts were given. Gabriel spoke about his father, about legacy, about the future of the family. And Maya watched Vincent's face during that speech and saw, for just a moment, something that might have been regret, quickly buried under the same practiced charm. And then, at exactly 9:40, the lights in the ballroom flickered once and went out entirely, plunging the room into total darkness. And Maya felt, rather than heard, the room shift, the particular collective intake of breath of 200 people realizing, all at once, that something was very wrong. Emergency lighting kicked in. Seconds later, dim red light spilling from fixtures along the walls, and in that red light, Maya saw exactly what she had expected to see and had hoped, until the very last second, that she would not. A dozen of Vincent's men, weapons drawn, moving in practiced formation toward the small cluster of Moreno captains gathered near the head table, while four more moved with deliberate purpose toward Gabriel himself, who was already reaching for the weapon. Maya knew he kept holstered beneath his jacket, except Gabriel's hand froze halfway there, because one of Vincent's men had a gun pressed directly against the back of Theo's head, the young guard's face white with terror, and Vincent's voice cut through the red-lit chaos. Calm, almost gentle. "Nobody needs to die tonight who doesn't have to, Gabriel," Vincent said, stepping forward into the dim light, his own weapon raised but not aimed at anyone in particular. The posture of a man who believed completely that he had already won. "This doesn't have to be ugly. You step back. You let your captain stand down. And in the morning, the family is mine. And everyone who's smart enough to recognize that gets to go home to their families. The only people who don't get to go home are the ones too stubborn to understand that this was always going to happen eventually." Gabriel's hand was still frozen near his jacket, his eyes on Theo, on the gun, pressed to the young man's skull, and Maya understood, in that moment, exactly what Vincent had built his entire plan around. He had correctly calculated that Gabriel Moreno would not risk a young man's life for his own, not even to save himself, not even to save the family. What Vincent had not calculated, what Vincent could not have calculated, because he had spent 3 months looking at Maya and seeing nothing but a woman in an expensive dress standing quietly beside the man she loved, was that there was someone else in that ballroom who had spent 29 years being looked at and underestimated, and who had absolutely no intention of standing quietly for one more second. Maya moved before she had finished deciding to move, the way Walter had trained her, the way 11 years of muscle memory took over in the half-second between thought and action. The man holding the gun to Theo's head was 3 feet to Maya's left, his attention entirely on Gabriel, entirely on the negotiation, completely, and totally dismissive of the heavy-set woman in the green dress standing nearby, because men like him had spent their whole lives being trained, the same as everyone else, to see a woman built like Maya and file her under Harmless before their brains even finished processing the rest of the information. That assumption cost him everything. Maya's hand closed around his wrist in the same motion that her hip drove into his side, a movement that used his own weight and his own surprise against him. And the gun discharged into the ceiling in a deafening crack as Maya wrenched it sideways and down, the man's arm bending at an angle it was never meant to bend. And before he had finished screaming, Maya had the gun in her own hand, and Theo was scrambling backward, free, alive. The ballroom exploded into chaos, gunfire and screaming, and the crash of overturned tables. 200 guests in formal wear diving for cover, and in the strobing chaos of the red emergency lighting and the muzzle flashes, Maya became something that none of the people in that room, not Vincent, not his men, not even most of Gabriel's own captains, had ever seen before and would never forget for the rest of their lives. She moved through Vincent's men with the brutal, economical precision of someone who had spent over a decade training specifically for moments like this. Every strike designed to end a confrontation in the fewest possible seconds. No wasted motion, no hesitation. A second gunman went down with a broken knee before he registered Maya was even moving toward him. A third, larger man swung at her with the kind of overconfident haymaker that men always seemed to think would work on Maya specifically, as if her size meant she'd be easy to knock down. And Maya ducked under it, drove her shoulder into his ribs, and used his own momentum to send him crashing through a table that had, until 30 seconds earlier, held an elaborate ice sculpture. Gabriel, freed from the standoff the moment Theo was no longer a hostage, had his own weapon out and was moving with lethal efficiency toward the captains, still under threat. But it was Maya, moving through the dark in a green dress with a stolen handgun and 11 years of training, who reached Vincent Castellano first. Vincent had backed toward the ballroom's side exit, his earlier calm completely shattered, his weapon raised and shaking slightly as he tried to track Maya's movement through the strobing red light. "Stay back," Vincent said, his voice cracking, all the practiced charm gone, replaced by something raw and frightened. "Stay back. You don't understand what you're." Maya didn't stop moving. Vincent fired, once, and missed, the bullet shattering a window somewhere behind Maya, and before he could fire again, Maya was on him, closing the distance in the half-second it took him to realize his shot had gone wide, and the folding knife that had spent 11 years cutting nothing more dangerous than gym tape was suddenly in Maya's hand. Not to kill, never to kill, but to disarm, the blade flicking out and across Vincent's wrist with surgical precision. And Vincent screamed, dropping the gun, clutching his wrist, stumbling backward, until he hit the wall and slid down it, staring up at Maya with an expression of total, uncomprehending shock. "What?" Vincent said, his voice barely a whisper, blood seeping between his fingers. "What are you?" Maya stood over him, breathing hard, the adrenaline of the last 90 seconds beginning to recede into something colder and steadier, and looked down at the man who had spent months planning to murder his own family in this ballroom, who had looked at Maya for 3 months and seen nothing, who had built his entire plan around the assumption that the heavy-set woman in the corner didn't matter. "I'm the woman you called charming," Maya said quietly. Around them, the gunfire was already dying down, Gabriel's captains regaining control of the room, Vincent's remaining men either disarmed or unconscious, and the emergency lights flickered back to full brightness, just in time to illuminate the entire ballroom. Shattered glass, overturned tables, a dozen of Vincent's men in various states of defeat, and at the center of it all, Vincent Castellano sitting against the wall with a bleeding wrist, staring up at Maya Quinn with the dawning horror of a man who had finally, far too late, understood exactly what he had underestimated. Gabriel reached Maya seconds later, his weapon still in hand, his eyes sweeping over her with the desperate, frantic focus of a man checking for injuries before he'd even fully processed what he'd just watched. "Maya," he said, his voice raw. "Are you hurt?" Did he? "I'm fine," Maya said, and she was, breathing hard, dress torn slightly at the shoulder, but fine, completely fine. And the realization seemed to hit Gabriel all at once. The adrenaline and the relief, and something else underneath it, something that looked almost like awe. He looked down at Vincent, slumped against the wall, and then back at Maya, and then around the ruined ballroom, at his captains slowly emerging from cover, at the dozen of Vincent's men either unconscious or groaning on the floor, disarmed by a woman in a green evening gown, using a folding knife and 11 years of training nobody had known she had. "You," Gabriel said slowly, "have been holding out on me." "It never came up," Maya said, and despite everything, despite the adrenaline and the ringing in her ears from the gunshots, she felt something that was almost a laugh trying to escape, the absurdity of the understatement landing even in the middle of the wreckage. Gabriel's captains were already moving, securing Vincent's surviving men, and Theo, the young guard whose life Maya had saved in the first 3 seconds of chaos, was staring at Maya with an expression of total reverence that would, Maya suspected, never fully go away. Gabriel turned to Vincent, and the warmth that had been in his voice when he spoke to Maya vanished, replaced by something Maya had never heard from him before, something ancient and cold and absolutely final. "You brought guns into my father's house," Gabriel said quietly. crouching slightly to look Vincent in the eye. You put a weapon to the head of a 22-year-old kid who has been loyal to this family his entire life. And you did it because you believed, after everything, after every dinner at this house, every holiday, every year of my life you were present for, that I would be easy, that this family would be easy. Vincent said nothing, his face pale, blood still seeping slowly from his wrist where Maya's knife had found him. I'm not going to kill you here, Gabriel continued, his voice never rising, which somehow made it worse. Not in front of everyone. Not tonight. Tonight is for the people you tried to take from me. But you should know, Vincent, in whatever time you have left to think about it, that the woman who just took apart 12 of your men and disarmed you personally, the woman you spent 3 months calling charming and meaning something else entirely, she's the reason you're going to leave this room alive at all. I asked her, while you were bleeding on my floor, whether we should just let this happen tonight and clean it up after. She said no. She said that wasn't who I should be. Maya hadn't actually said that, not in those words, but she didn't correct him, because she understood, watching Gabriel's face, that this was Gabriel deciding, in real time, who he wanted to be in the aftermath of tonight, and that Maya's presence in that decision mattered more than the literal accuracy of the sentence. Vincent was led away by 2 of the captains, his wrist roughly bandaged, his face a portrait of total defeat, and the ballroom slowly began the long process of returning to something resembling order, captains directing staff, the captains' families being quietly escorted to safe rooms within the estate, the broken glass and overturned tables being cleared by a small army of staff who had clearly, given how quickly and calmly they moved, dealt with aftermaths like this before. Maya found herself, 20 minutes later, sitting on the edge of a fountain in the estate's private garden, the cool night air a sharp relief after the chaos of the ballroom. Her hands finally starting to shake now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go. Gabriel found her there, sitting down beside her without a word, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. The sound of the fountain and the distant murmur of the estate slowly settling back into normalcy, the only sounds between them. 11 years, Gabriel said finally. You said 11 years of training. Why didn't you ever tell me? Maya looked down at her hands, at the small cut along one knuckle she hadn't even noticed getting. Because every time I've ever told someone what I can do, she said slowly, the reaction has always been some version of surprise, that someone who looks like me could do it. Like my body and my skill were supposed to be in competition with each other. Like one disqualified the other. I got tired of seeing that look on people's faces. So I stopped telling people. Gabriel reached over and took Maya's shaking hand in both of his, gently, like something he was afraid of breaking, despite everything he'd just watched her do. Maya, he said quietly, tonight you saved my life, and Theo's life, and the lives of every captain in that room, and you did it because you'd spent 11 years becoming exactly the kind of person who could. And the only thing I felt, watching you, the only thing, was that I have never in my entire life seen anything more extraordinary. Maya looked up at him, and for the first time since the lights had gone out in that ballroom, she let herself believe, fully, that this was real, that the man sitting beside her in the quiet garden meant exactly what he said, and that there was no version of this story where she had to shrink herself back down to fit into anyone's expectations ever again. In the days that followed, the story of what had happened in the Moreno ballroom spread through the organization with the speed and inevitability of a story that everyone present had witnessed, and no one could quite believe. Vincent Castellano's betrayal and the collapse of his plan became the kind of cautionary tale that would be told for years, a warning to anyone in the organization who might be tempted to underestimate the people around the family's leadership. But the detail that spread fastest the detail that every captain and lieutenant and soldier wanted to discuss in hushed, awed tones, was not Vincent's downfall at all. It was Maya, the woman in the green dress, the self-defense instructor from the gym near the harbor, who had, in under 2 minutes, disarmed a dozen armed men with her bare hands and a folding knife, and who had, by every account from everyone who'd been in that ballroom, moved like something out of a nightmare while doing it. Theo told the story to anyone who would listen, with the breathless enthusiasm of a young man who had nearly died and been saved by someone he'd previously thought of, mostly as the boss's girlfriend who's nice to everyone. And within a week, Maya found that the way people looked at her had changed completely. The dismissive once-overs replaced by something that bordered on reverence. Captains who had previously been carefully, distantly polite, now greeting her with genuine warmth, the kind reserved for people who had proven, beyond any doubt, that they belonged. Vincent himself was dealt with, quietly in the days following the gala, in a manner that Maya was deliberately not told the details of, and which she did not ask about. Understanding that there were parts of Gabriel's world that existed in a moral space she did not need to enter, and that Gabriel, in turn, never asked Maya to enter it. What mattered, what Maya cared about, was what happened 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, when Gabriel walked into the gym during Maya's afternoon class, in front of all 40 of her students, ranging from 9 years old to 63, and asked her, in front of all of them, to marry him. He didn't have a ring with him, having apparently decided, in classic Gabriel fashion, that the moment mattered more than the performance of it, and Maya, standing in the middle of her gym in workout clothes, sweat still on her forehead from teaching a class, surrounded by 40 people who had become, over the years, something like a family, said yes without a second of hesitation, and the gym erupted into noise that probably violated several building codes. The wedding itself was small, by the standards of Gabriel's world, held in the same garden where they'd sat together the night of the gala. And Maya wore a dress that fit her exactly the way she wanted it to, made by a designer who had, on Gabriel's very specific instructions, been told that any suggestion of slimming, hiding, or minimizing would result in the immediate cancellation of the contract. Theo stood at the edge of the garden during the ceremony, not as a guard this time, but as a guest, and cried, openly, the entire time, which nobody mentioned afterward out of respect. And 6 months after that, when a smaller, less organized, far more desperate crew made the mistake of attempting to ambush a Moreno shipment under the assumption that the family's defenses had been weakened by the chaos of Vincent's betrayal, it was Maya, not Gabriel, who happened to be at the docks that night for entirely unrelated reasons. And it was Maya who ended the attempted ambush in under 4 minutes, alone, before Gabriel's security detail had even fully mobilized, a fact that became, within the organization, simply understood as a kind of natural law, that the boss's wife was not someone to be tested twice. Maya Quinn had spent 29 years being told, in 1,000 small and large ways, that her size made her less than, that the space she took up in the world was something to apologize for, something to shrink away from notice. She had spent 29 years being underestimated by people who looked at her and saw nothing worth their attention. And in the end, it was precisely that underestimation, that quiet, constant dismissal, that had given Maya the one thing every dangerous person in Gabriel Moreno's world had never had the chance to develop: the ability to move through a room completely unwatched, completely unsuspected, until the exact moment it mattered most. She had married a man who looked at every part of her, the parts the world had told her to hide, and the parts the world had never bothered to look for at all, and saw nothing but a person worth fighting beside. There would be other nights, other threats, other men who walked into rooms certain they understood the shape of the danger waiting for them. And every single time, the calculation would be wrong in the exact same way, because the danger was never the man in the expensive suit with the famous name. It was the woman beside him, the one who had spent a lifetime being looked past, who had turned that invisibility into the sharpest weapon anyone in that world would ever face, and who had no intention of ever apologizing for the space she took up again. And in the harbor district, in the gym that still smelled like bleach and old rubber mats, the 40 students Maya still taught every week were told, by their instructor, the same thing Walter had told Maya all those years ago, that the world would try to make them small, and that their job, every single day, was to make sure it never succeeded. Drop a comment below if you think Vincent got exactly what he deserved, and let us know which moment in Maya's hit you the hardest. If you loved watching an underestimated woman become the most formidable person in the room, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe for more stories where the people everyone overlooks turn out to be the ones who were never meant to be overlooked at all.